Come on. We're now going to look at modern classification. If you're just tuning in on the recording, I apologize. I forgot to record the last one. We're going to look at modern classification. Let's put some water. So, how do we determine what a species is? So we know that Homo sapiens are a species. We know that Homo erectus are a species. How different do we have to be before we're called a species? Yeah, how different do you have to be? Just trying to think of an example here. Yeah, let's go with dogs. Think about dogs, for example. We all, Chihuahua is a dog, a Great Dane's a dog. They look completely different, right? How are they related? And how closely are they related? So we want to look at how species change and how we know how to identify them as a new species. So we're going to look at, these guys' ideas. So how come we didn't use Linnaeus' system? We've used most of it, but the problem is their systems are old. They didn't really account for evolution, which is now essentially like it's proven, right? So their idea is that species are unchanging, they're distinct, and they're natural. We know that that's not true. So biological species concept defines a species as a group of organisms that is able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring in a natural setting. So a species is a group of organisms that is able to interbreed and it can produce fertile offspring. This is where I'm going to bring back something I told you I'd bring. Oh, sorry, not that. This is where I'm bringing back our friend the liger. Ligers are real; they exist. So when you have a liger, a lion and a tiger interbreed, completely discovered by accident. They just had two pens beside each other, but they exist. They're real. You can breed a tiger and a lion, both male and female, to produce differently looking offspring, but they're a thing. So this exists. It's real, right? It's not a species, though. A liger is not something we've classified as a species. How come? Can they interbreed? Yes. Is it a natural setting? Not really. No, not really. Right? They don't exist that much in the wild. Like this, it's something we discovered in zoos, right? Like, oh crap, this is new. The other one as well is, can it produce fertile offspring? You cannot breed a liger with another liger. It doesn't work. I cannot breed a liger with a lion. I cannot breed a liger with a tiger. They don't produce offspring. So yes, they can interbreed, but they can't produce fertile offspring and they can't have a natural setting. So no, it's not actually a species. It exists. It's a real thing, but it's an anomaly. So next we're going to look at phylogeny, which is how does it's looking at the history of a species. So this defines a species as a cluster of organisms. Sorry, a phylogenetic species is a cluster of organisms that is distinct from other clusters. So one, it's distinct from other clusters. And two, it shows evidence of a pattern of ancestry and descent. So let's load up an example of this. This is a lot of words. Let's turn this into I don't like that one. I want to do no. Maybe I do like that one. Okay, I'm gonna use that one. So a phylogenetic species. What is it? So what does it mean? It's distinct from other clusters and it shows evidence of a pattern of ancestry and descent. What? This is a phylogenetic tree. So let's start at the bottom here. So I start with, hey, I've developed creatures with spines, with vertebrae. Cool. I have a shark. A shark does not have a bony skeleton. It is cartilage. It's not bones. But anything past this does have bony skeleton. So now I have a ray finned fish that has a bony skeleton and it has a vertebrae. So it's a descendant of sharks. Let's go further. Amphibians are a descendant of sharks and ray finned fish because they have these two things, but they also have 4 limbs. And we keep going on and on. Amniotic egg. No, this doesn't mean you lay eggs. It just means it's an egg like that's used in fertilization and stuff. So now an amniotic egg, all of these fit there, right? But we have hair. Oh, we have primates and rodents. Meet all these traits. Or we have 2 post-orbital fenestrae, which I still don't really know what that fully means, to be honest with you. I think that means that like knees or something. I'm not fully sure. But again, this is a tree. I hope this kind of helps concrete that a little bit. But what that means when I say distinct from each other, but it also has a common ancestor and it shows the century. So when we classify species, we look at these characters. Those are characters. Hair is a character. Knees are a character. Amniotic eggs are characters. Okay, so let's look at these characters now. So these characters, when we see shared characters, it suggests that species are closely related and they evolved from a common ancestor. Think about all those primates we just looked at. What are some characters they share? We walk on our hind legs, for example. You know, we have big brains. You know, there's a lot of social characteristics. There's like our fur. Yes, even our arms. We have goosebumps. Like that's, you know, we use us being as, I guess, skinful as we are is relatively recent. So, you know, we're looking at shared characteristics to show if they've evolved from a common ancestor. So if you look at birds and dinosaurs, modern birds don't look like the dinosaurs, right? They don't look like it at all. But they are actually fairly closely related. They do have hollow bones. They have a very similar skeleton, albeit one's a lot smaller. They have the hip, leg, wrist, and shoulder structures that are very more similar to birds and reptiles. So chickens are more closely related to a T-Rex than a crocodile or a salamander is, right? So these are called morphological characteristics. There are 2, so this one's morphological characteristics. So how do I describe that? Like a morphological characteristics is not their appearance, but like the structure, I guess, the structure of the organism and its parts. So we know that, again, birds and dinosaurs are fairly closely related because they have all those similar characteristics. We're going to go to the other one. We have morphological and biochemical. So we use two different things to distinguish. Morphological is their structure, their parts. Biochemical is when we look at their nucleic acids, their amino acids, their DNA, all that stuff we spent 3 weeks learning. We look at that stuff and we use that to figure out a relationship. You've probably heard like the statistic, this thing is 99% similar to this thing. That's a biochemical relationship. And I'll show you a picture right after this. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in. You've seen it on your sheet there, but these are biochemical signals. So if we're looking at a chimpanzee, a gorilla, and an orangutan, all distinct species, right? They share, I don't know, I think it's a family. I think they're all part of the same family, but they are different. But if I look at their DNA, I can see that, I have this much DNA that controls, I don't know, hair color, for example, right? Seems to be a similar amount. This DNA controls the size of the eyes. Okay, cool. This DNA here controls the size of the brain. Very similar. So when we look at it like that, it's very, very similar. In fact, almost all of this stuff up here is similar until I get to this part. There's some minor differences, but generally speaking, it's basically identical until here. So what would we say? These are about, this is not the actual number, it's an example. Hey, these are all 90% related, right? Because 90% of their DNA is the exact same. This 10% down here seems to be different. That's what I mean by biochemical. Cool. So this shows one thing. This shows how alike their DNA is. But there's a key element missing here. Time. This shows what they're like now, but what were they like in the past? When did they start to branch apart? That's harder to find out. So we use a molecular clock for that. We use this to estimate. We don't know for sure. We're doing our best guess. We use this to estimate the amount of time it's taken from a species to evolve from a common ancestor. How long did it take from when humans came from Homo erectus, for example, or when Homo erectus came from just primates in general? We use a molecular clock for this. So we look at, what we do is I just take the 2 DNA sequences, right? I have 3 DNA sequences here. I'm going to take them, I'm going to compare them, and the more mutations there are, the more time has passed, is really what it boils down to, right? More mutations means that there's been more time to do mutations. We're able to generally come up with an estimate at how often mutations happen. I don't know the exact number, but maybe there's 1 mutation for every 100,000 years, right? If I see 10 mutations, 100,000 years times 10 million years between these two, for example. That's one way they can do it. Obviously, that's not an exact science. They're doing some guessing there. They're able to use patterns and stuff with it, but it's still not precise. So let's kind of bounce forward here into what's called a cladistic. So this is, we're going to define our organisms based on the order they diverge from a common ancestor. So, but before we were looking at how diverse they were, right? Genetically, how diverse they are. Now, I just want to know which one came first. Okay. So when we look at these cladistics, we look at two different things. One, we look at ancestral characters. Remember, and characters are those traits, ancestral traits that are found in an entire line. Do you remember that picture I showed you before? The vertebrae, right? For walking on four limbs, stuff like that. Those are traits. The next one, we're looking for derived characteristics. These are only found once we split it. So, for example, you know, the first four, but then we got the ambiotic egg. That is a derived characteristic. It's only found after the split. So ancestral characteristics, what the ones before had. Derived are what's new, what's different. So how do we organize this? We organize this in a cladogram. This is cladistics. This is still cladistics. It's just a map of it. So a cladogram, which is just a map of the cladistics, is a branching diagram, and it shows how these species have gone through. So this right here is looking at a couple different species. Again, I have my ends. If I'm looking at lilies right now, all four of these are ancestral traits, ancestral characters, right? But if I look at a conifer, you know, what's different between a conifer and a fern? Well, the derived characteristics is that there's now seeds. So I look at the past, I look left to figure out the ancestral stuff. I look at what's new to figure out the derived characteristics. So at some point, you're going to be reading one of these on a final. It's almost a guarantee. They almost always have one of these on a final, and they're going to ask you, what's the derived characteristics of a fern, or of a conifer, sorry. The derived characteristics of a conifer are its seeds. So still on cladograms. So how do we make these? We take what we're interested in, and we're just going to compare it. So all I do is I just sequence the order in which these evolved. Just chronological. What was the first one? What came next? What came next? What came next? What came next? Mm-hmm. Okay. Almost done here. Do I? Yeah, sure. No. Yeah, I will. I will do that. Sorry. I grabbed the wrong document. This was supposed to have it in. Here we go. So we think about these, cladograms here, right? This is just an example of it. Think about the traits and how they've derived over time, they've evolved over time. This is just a small group, right? What if I want to take a really big picture of life, all life? Nope, I'm on the wrong one. Sorry. Just pasting it in my file here. So if I want to take a snapshot of what all life looks like, these are just these are just little samples of a branch, right? These are, if you think about a tree, these are the tips of a tree. But if I look at the entire tree, it slowly gets branches and branches and branches. This is just an example. It's a very small example, but you start with more common ancestors. These would be the most ancient of species at the trunk, right? That all life derived from. And slowly we add on more traits. We add more diversity, and it keeps branching out. And each branch, here's vertebrae, but if we were to zoom in on this, you might see stuff like this. These all have vertebrae, for example. So when we look at the phylogenetics, we can go really, really broad with it. Okay, that's been a long talk, and why don't we head for our break a little bit early here? We'll come back about 10:55 to finish this up. Okay, so last one. Oh, domains and kingdoms. So going back into this tree of life thing again. This is not the actual tree. It's just an example. There would be millions of things on this if this was the actual tree. It's just to kind of show, to make a point. So again, the tree of life is a phylogenetic tree. I know that's not going to be visible on your guys' documents here, but again, we started here, right? We started at a base of a tree, and as time goes on, as new characteristics get added, more and more diversity happens. So if I'm following this red line here, you eventually end up with humans, us today. But there were branches all the way throughout. Maybe we have chimpanzees here. Maybe there's crocodiles here. Maybe there's, I don't know, woolly mammoths here, and so on and so forth. So we want to start looking at kingdoms. So we learned all about, you guys remember that big picture of all the different 9 levels? There's more than one kingdom. There's more than one. So there's more kingdoms and there's more domains. So we have 3 domains. We have bacteria, we have archaea, and eukarya. And we also have 6 kingdoms: bacteria, archaea, protists, fungi, plantae, plants, and animals. So all of life is contained within those 3 domains, and those 3 domains have a total of 6 kingdoms. So we classify it on domain based on its cell type and structure. That's as broad as we can get. Are you a prokaryotic cell, or are you a eukaryotic cell? And then we look at, for the kingdoms, the cell type, the structure, and the nutrition. How do you get your energy? So, we immediately classify autotrophs versus heterotrophs, for example, right? So we're going to look at each of these domains and each of these kingdoms. And the key thing I want us to really focus on here is, what is the difference between these 2 things? What they're going to eventually do is they're going to give you, okay, here's an animal, or here's a thing, and it has these 3 characteristics. Is this going to, which of these 3 kingdoms is it going to? So those are the types of things we're kind of trying to get out of this. So the kingdom bacteria members of both the domain and the kingdom bacteria. Like literally it goes bacteria to bacteria, just as simple as that. So these are prokaryotic cells, and their cell walls contain peptoglycan. Those are the 2 big facts here that they're really going to be tested on. They can survive lots of different environments. Again, we've seen bacteria around volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean. Most are heterotrophs. They eat other things. They eat other bacteria. And of course, there's the most, right? There's way more bacteria than anything else. So next, we're going to go into the next domain, archaea. So these are even more ancient, but they are closely related to our eukaryotic ancestors. These were probably the first things alive. If you guys remember, like, oh, well, there used to be no oxygen, and then things did photosynthesis and spit out a bunch of oxygen. That's probably these guys. So archaea are, they lack this peptoglycan, so that's a big one. Bacteria has peptoglycan. Archaea does not have peptoglycan. That's one of your big clues. Most are heterotrophs, and then some can survive really extreme things, right? And then we're going to go to our final domain. So bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So these have a membrane-bound nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. The others two domains did not. So how you know it's a eukaryotic domain is because it has those membranes and it has a nucleus. All of the life that you probably think of, bugs, plants, animals, is within this. This is your stereotypical life. Okay. So we're going to zoom in on the kingdoms now. So one thing I want to note, all the kingdoms we're going to go through now, all of these kingdoms are going to be a part of, these four kingdoms here, 1, 2, 3, 4, are a part of eukarya. Bacteria is the kingdom for bacteria, and archaea is the kingdom for archaea. So an easy way to remember this is literally if it's different, it has to be in the eukaryotic domain. So we're going to look at those. The kingdom Protista, again, part of the domain eukarya, right? These are, they can be unicellular, colonial, which is just a bunch of unicellulars kind of bunched up. You've ever seen like fish eggs or frog eggs, kind of like that? Or they can be multicellular. So that's your key characteristic there. How do I know which kingdom it goes into? One of the keys here is which types of cells. So the next kingdom here is fungi. So fungi is unicellular or multicellular, but they are not colonial. Fungus absorbs nutrients from organic matters. Where does fungus grow on? Think about mold. Mold's a fungus. Where do you see mold? Trees, your food, right? It grows from organic matter. It absorbs the nutrients within it. So again, they consume other things. They're heterotrophic. They have to consume their energy. They can't move. And this is the big one here. They have chitin. If you're going to be asked to identify a fungus, it's going to be because of that. That's going to be the key, I can tell you right now. So how is a fungus different than a plant? Fungus, how is a moss? How is a mushroom different than a plant? Most people think of mushrooms a plant, but it's not. It's a fungus. Do you want to think of the big difference, the really big one? Characteristics of plants? Photosynthesis, right? They're green. Plants make their own energy. They are, for the most part, autotrophs, right? There's some exceptions. Think about like the Venus flytrap, right? That eats things. That's different. But so plants are autotrophs, and they are multicellular, and they have cell walls consistent of cellulose. And then, of course, we have our lovely animals, right? We're part of this kingdom. Every animal is heterotrophic. It consumes to get energy. Every animal is multicellular, and every animal is a eukaryotic cell. Well, I mean, that one's redundant. It's in the eukaryotic kingdom. And most animals are motile for a portion of the life. What does that mean? We move. We're mobile. The biggest fact here probably is that every animal is multicellular. So at some point, you're going to be asked questions. Identify if this type of creature, again, which kingdom is it from? Which domain is it from? One of the things they're probably going to give you is the types of cells it is. Is it colonial, unicellular, multicellular? And another key fact they'll probably give you is it a heterotroph or an autotroph? And the last one is, does it have chitin or not? So it's usually those three characteristics that you can kind of deduce based off it. We'll look at exams on Monday and Tuesday. Okay, so this eukaryotic domain, viruses. We've talked about them before, but viruses, if you think about how, let's imagine this is a germ, this big red circle I'm drawing here, right? Actually, I'm gonna erase that. Let's imagine, I'm gonna cover the whole thing. I will delete this. This red circle is a germ, right? We know how small germs are, right? They're tiny. They are a millionth time smaller than like the pin of a needle. That's an exaggeration. They're very much smaller than a pin of a needle. They're tiny. You can't see them. You need a microscope. That red dot's a virus. They are tiny. They're small. They're smaller than a cell. We don't classify it as life. They don't fully meet our characteristics. So they are not considered living. They do not possess cells, and they are not a cell. So they are not considered living. We do not place them in our classification system. We kind of have like a small little other section. A virus is just that one of those nucleic acids. You remember DNA, right? Your entire strain of DNA. It's just one of those with a tiny smidge of protein. I cannot emphasize to you how small viruses are. Okay. So let's go over some of this stuff. So I got 4 different questions here. This synonymous term, what does it mean? It means similar, combined with. So domain bacteria is synonymous with kingdom bacteria, right? Again, it's in the name. You know it's part of that kingdom. You know it's part of that domain because it's in the name. The same thing with archaea. They are linked. But the eukaryotic domain contains the Protozoa, fungi, plantae, and animalia. Plants, animal, fungi, and Protozoa. Okay. So what's the same and what's different? I just threw a bunch of information at you. How can we organize this a little bit? So I think I'm trying to remember. Do you have both of these or just one? Do you have this one printed out? And is it filled out? Yeah. Except this is the wrong file. I don't remember exactly what I did when I printed this out. No? Is it this? Like, is there?
Yeah, it's because I just like that.
Oh, but these squares are blank here, like blank. Okay, these are the actual squares. Okay, so this is the organized version of it. So we have a couple of features. We have the cell wall, the cell type, the walls, the number of cells, and how it eats. So those are your four main characteristics that will help you identify what the heck is what. So for example, prokaryotic cells are bacteria and archaea. They are all unicellular. Some have peptoglycan, some do not have peptoglycan. So if I tell you, hey, I have a unicellular prokaryotic cell with peptoglycan, you know it has to be a bacteria. The eukaryotic cells are mostly multicellular. There is some unicellular, and their cell walls have something except for animals. Our cell walls do not have anything, but otherwise the rest of them do. So I quickly want to take a step back, and I want to talk about are these guys here, protistas. If I tell you to name fungi, you'll be able to name fungi. If I tell you to name plants, you can give me plants. If I tell you what an animal is, you can give that to me, right? We're usually pretty good with these three. So what the heck is a protista, right? Like, what is that? It's not as obvious as the name implies. So a protista is anything eukaryotic that we don't classify as a fungi, a plant, or an animal. So one example is a certain type of algae, for example. Oh, not that. Okay, I've lost it. One example is a paramecium, for example. It's a eukaryotic cell. This looks more like a bacteria, right? This thing right here looks more like a bacteria. It's a paramecium organism. It eats other small like bacteria and stuff. It looks like a bacteria, but because it's eukaryotic, it cannot go into this kingdom. So if it's not if it's a eukaryotic cell that's not an obvious fungi, an obvious plant, or an obvious animal, it goes into protista. It's kind of like our leftover group, if that makes sense, right? It's like the person who's picked last at dodgeball. It's that group. So what's the difference between protista and fungi? The cell walls of some protists contain cellulose, only some though, only some. But the cell walls of fungi are all made of chitin. Okay, we're almost done. Okay. So what I mean, you're going to have to use this information to try and classify stuff. Here's an example of this. I want to know what kingdom, remember there are 6 kingdoms, what kingdom has organisms where they have organ systems, they lack cell walls, and they ingest food. Let's start crossing them off the list. I'm going to write all 6 here. You don't have to write this, but I just want to go. I'm going to write our 6 kingdoms. So I have bacteria, so Archaea, Protista, fungi, plant, and Amelia. Okay. So I've got these 6 ones here, right? So if we're looking at that sheet from before, let's look at these. Organ systems. I'm going to skip that for now. I want to go to the other ones. So lacks cell walls. What that means is if it has a cell wall, I can get rid of it. Not this one, which means it's not this. This has cell walls, so it's not that. This has cell walls, so it's not that. This has cell walls, so it's not a fungi. This has cell walls, so it's not a plantae. So right away, just looking at the cell walls, I know it has to be an Animalia. But what if that wasn't there? Well, then we have to think about this a little bit deeper. First off, if it has an organ system, organs are multicellular. It could not be these 2. These are single cellular, right? Or unicellular, sorry. So it has to be multicellular. And if it ingests food, so now I'm looking at just these 4 here, it can't be a plant, which means it has to be either a fungi, an animal, or a protista. Is all that there really is there. So the key thing here really was this that has no cell walls. Animals are the only ones without cell walls. If it had cell walls, and it did ingest food, it would probably be a plant then. It would be a plant. Okay, so that's it. So we will finish up everything tomorrow is the goal. On Monday and Tuesday, we're going to start doing reviews for it. We're going to start doing reviews for the exam that's on Wednesday. Bear with me 1 second. Here we go. So what you guys can do, again, I know we're moving really quickly and I apologize. There's just a short quiz on here that you can use your notes for. So I'll give you guys some time to do that. You get the rest of the class to be able to do that chapter 17 quiz there. Tomorrow we'll go over chapter 16 and then we'll be done with it. So here's our acronym. Okay, you guys remember this thing? How do I remember which one's which? I'm starting with the most broad. I'm working my way down specifically. I've just taken the first letter. D, kingdom is K, phylum's P, and so on and so forth. Dumb kids playing catch on freeways get squished. That's how you can help remember that. So I would recommend you guys write that down. You can try and come up with your own as well, but usually my experience here, the hardest part of this is which one's which? I don't remember. So once you guys write that down, then you're good to go.